Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Perspective with Viv. Today, we're talking about embracing our shadow. And I have a special guest with me, Christina Carlson. Hi, Christina.
Hi, Viv.
Hi. So I'm really excited. I always say, have this like way that we enter the podcast. I'm going to do that. So hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Perspective with Viv. My name is Vivian and welcome to the show. So I'm going to just drop in quickly with my intro for my guest, actually. So we have Christina Carlson here and I have our bios. I'm going to read it for you because it's actually quite delicious because that's what led to us having this particular topic today. So Christina Carlson is a self-relationship coach, speaker, facilitator, and the host of the podcast Bitches, Witches, and Queers. They have their bachelor's in theology and have devoted extensive hours to continuing education in intra and interpersonal relationships. And they work with those who feel like they have to hide their messiness to belong, which is why this episode is really something that I feel like is in line with who she is and what she does in terms of her work. She supports people to create lives with internal safety, community, belonging, and confidence. So, hi, Christina. I would love for you to introduce yourself in your own words, letting us know where we can find you.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm Christina Carlson. I like to call myself a self-relationship coach because I found that in all of my work, the most important thing is your relationship with yourself because everything comes from there. And you can find me at ChristinaMCarlson.com.
All right. Okay. So we're going to go straight into the topic. Now, as I said, today's topic is on embracing your shadow. And for those tuning in, I've referenced on the show how I believe in embracing your less beautiful parts. These are the parts that you pushed away to be accepted. So tell me, Christina, what is your perspective and approach to the relationship we have with ourselves, especially when working with clients?
Well, my perspective is that for a lot of us, the way that we were raised and socialized, we're taught to cut ourselves off to parts of ourselves that aren't exactly convenient and or don't fit the mold of society around us. There's a lot of disconnection for what we actually want, what we're desiring. And so when it comes to ourselves, we tend to think of other people as people, and we tend to not think of ourselves as people. Yeah. So in a lot of my work, in my own experience and in my clients' lives, there's this shift that begins to take place in seeing ourselves as a person that is a whole person, which includes the acceptance of those parts of ourselves that are harder to accept, whether that be actual flaws or just things that other people perceive as flaws. And we begin to allow ourselves to see the good that we can bring as well. We're seeing ourselves as a whole human being.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I love that. I feel like for me, my perspective with shadow, it's like, I feel like I'm just realizing that this is like the cheat code of your relationship with yourself. Being able to look at those aspects that you thoroughly denied and repressed and pushed away and being like, oh, wow, there's a superpower in these things. There's a superpower in being able to look at these things, embrace them, converse with them and be like, you know what? I accept you. You may actually show up in a negative way, but my acceptance of you can enable me to use this flaw, quote unquote, in a positive way. So My next question, how would you define shadow work?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this because if you didn't ask, I was going to ask you to define it. For me, I see the shadow as anything that you can't see. So, or you don't want to, or you have repressed for whatever reason. Yeah. So for me, I like to think of the example that like when this was like 3 or 4 years ago, I realized that I was trying to be my ideal self. And I know that's like common self-help language, but what this ended up turning into for me was trying to be someone better than me and subsequently someone without the flaws that I had. And the ideal version of me, which is actually not someone that exists. So in doing that, I was actually pushing away the acceptance piece. And because of that, I realized the only way that I was actually going to heal and change like the generational patterns in my family line for my daughter was to accept the things that I actually didn't like about myself And these were very simple things at first. It was like, I just don't like the way that like my attitude is, or how I get like all tense about this particular thing, or like the way my hands are. It could be very simple. There was a wide range of these things, but the more I was able to be with like the cringe and like the icky whatever, and just be neutral about it, the more I was like, oh, like I'm actually connected to all these other humans. Like we are all just very human. And it was a really healing experience. So when I think of shadow work, that's kind of what I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of the things that we would otherwise not want to see, but we allow in and move into a place of acceptance. Maybe not yet celebration, but in the space of like, I'm gonna be okay with this existing.
Yeah, I like that. I feel like for me, shadow work, and I feel as though it's now that I'm really realizing that I'm in the depth of it. I've defined shadow work for me as being able to face my shadows, which I refer to as my flaws, and being able to transmute them to light. So I feel like, and that's exactly what you explained, being able to face these flaws, being able to understand them, accept them. Acceptance is first before celebration. So I find that shadow work is really diving deep inside, like diving deep into the dark, swimming and being like, wow, this is what I don't like about you. This is what I don't like about you. And you find that these things are also things you picked up from your environment. So it's like unlearning those things, rewiring them. And then the transmuting comes from being like, okay, I have this flaw where I get anxious when things don't go as planned. So I have this thing with control. What can I do with that when that happens? Can I just take a pause, take a deep breath, and then remember that, you know what, life has this particular flow and it cannot be the same way. It cannot go the way I expect it to go all the time. So one needs to practice detachment. One also needs to practice surrender and being able to dance with the flow of life when things don't go as planned. So it's about, for me, I find that shadow work is about unlearning, relearning, and transmuting. But that key thing is acceptance. The key thing is acceptance. So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, well, I want to add to that too. I think it's really important that in an acceptance, there needs to be, in my experience and with my clients as well, there needs to be a component of compassion, of self-compassion. Because as we're taking a view at this, we can't look at ourselves and be like, this is disgusting, I'm horrible, and expect that to then transmute. Like if we want to heal, or we want to be able to see it in a different way, we have to be able to be curious, which means we have to hold ourselves with like, I learned this from somewhere. I did this because it was useful to me in some particular way. This is like a valid coping mechanism or experience. There has to be a compassionate look to be able to accept and to be able to transmute, as you said.
For sure, for sure. And I think that, you know, it all comes down to self-love, our relationship with ourselves, which we will talk about a bit later. But I do agree with that, because I felt like there was a slight trigger when you said that, because at the time when I was going through deep shadow work, because I don't think shadow work ever stops. So there was the first level of shadow work for me was the hardest, because I genuinely battled with deep self-hate. So looking at your flaws, or my flaws, I couldn't be compassionate. It took a while to build that compassion, which had to come from building that love for self, enough to be like, look, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have certain things about you that you don't like. In fact, isolate everybody else's opinions and responses to that negative flaw of yours and just come back to self. How do you feel about yourself when you remove other people's reactions to this particular flaw of yours? You find that you're kinder and you're holding yourself to a less higher standard, because it's just you and you. So I like that a lot about shadow work. And my next question is, so how can one begin to embrace their shadow and embrace their messiness?
I think very much this will depend on the person, but I would say start in an area that feels like a tiny bit stretchy for you, but not overwhelming. Because one thing you don't want to do in any kind of healing is to overwhelm your system, because then you're just recreating a shame cycle that isn't going to support you in the long term. So for me, this was like a very simple practice of kind of like mindful movement. So just like I would massage my feet every night with oil and hold my feet and just say nice things to myself. Not even nice things at first, but just like It's okay that I'm here. It's okay that I'm human. And anything that was coming up for me, it would be, I would respond to myself with, that's really hard for me right now. And that's what I suggest to a lot of people is like, can you admit that this is hard for you? And like you just named, take everyone else out of it for a minute. Can you say this is hard for you right now? Because you don't need to caretake other people's experience of this right now. Definitely. It's just you and you. How can you simply say, this is really hard for me right now? Just admitting that, even admitting that offering yourself compassion is hard for you right now. It's those accepting of what is right in front of you in those very simple ways that feels really vulnerable, and can be profoundly healing for you. To what you're doing basically is you're creating space for yourself to be with you in a way that isn't hostile.
For sure. I like that answer. I really do. The word that came to my mind when you were speaking was self-dialogue. Can you share any thoughts on self-dialogue?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't use that language, but I do, because I just hadn't thought about it like a dialogue, but self-communication, self-talk. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Which is the same thing. Mm-hmm. I like that framing of it though. I find that it's, honestly, this was one of the hardest things for me in my healing, and is something that was the focus of a lot of my personal growth for a very long time. Because the way that I was raised was in high control religious groups, and I was told that my inner critic was the same voice as God's. And so it was incredibly negative, because that's the view that I was handed of God. And so it was constantly tearing me down, and I believed that was for my own good. So that became my internal voice. So my dialogue with myself was really intensely negative. And I think it's incredible. Honestly, being in spaces with coaches, and I do this for my clients now, is having someone mirror to you what you're saying and teach you a different way of talking about yourself, even in those sessions, can have a profound impact on how you talk to yourself in your mind. Because oftentimes we don't have a framework until we start practicing this for what it could even sound like in a nicer way, or in a kinder, more relational way. So it's definitely a huge piece of the work.
Yeah. Whew. Yeah, that really hit me, because when you were speaking, I was thinking about how, where I'm also coming from, I wasn't used to gentle, kind language. So, and when you said inner critic, I love that, because obviously being used to harsh language and thinking that was a norm, you can imagine internalizing that kind of voice, and then having that be a voice in your body and how you live life, having that voice run messages through your head. For me to get to this point where I have a calmer, gentler, kinder voice was a huge feat, because I didn't know about gentle, kind talk. And now, because when you were speaking about communicating with yourself, I remembered how I was actually very nasty to myself when I was going through my self-development process, or before I realized that, in order to develop, I need to actually approach myself from a kinder place. So I think that's why I think about self-dialogue a lot, because a lot of us are coming from places where we didn't know that we're subjected to verbal abuse, and that really turned or, tainted the voice we have inside. So that's why I've realized that, yes, self-dialogue is self-dialogue. You communicating with yourself, and shadow work is also something that helps you to isolate the voices that aren't yours. So it's just you and you in your body, enough to be like, okay, let's start all over. Who are you? And how can we get to a place where there's balance, where our ideal selves, my higher self and my physical self are aligned, at least close to alignment, So I appreciate that. And I encourage listeners to practice being kind and gentle with speech to themselves, because not only does that change the way you relate to yourself, but it also changes the way you relate to other people. And our relationship with people is determinant on our relationship with ourselves. And it starts with all that self-dialogue and communication on the inside. So yeah, that's what came to mind for me.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so critical, and it's interesting. I want to point out something that's like the opposite side of the coin, but still the same. You mentioned that like our relationship with ourselves directly affects our relationship with other people, and so like the quick jump to that would be if we're mean to ourselves, we're mean to other people, which isn't necessarily true,
Okay.
but it does affect it because if we're mean to ourselves, we're often passive aggressive or manipulative unintentionally towards other people, even if we're being kind externally. There's this buildup of resentment oftentimes because we're taking on more responsibility than we need to be by being harsh on ourselves.
Yes.
So it can manifest in different ways, but you're right. It definitely has a direct effect.
Yeah. So let's talk about our relationships with ourselves, relationships we have with ourselves, like building ourselves up from the ground up. I don't know what your experience was. I'd love to know. I'll start first. I felt like building myself up from scratch was like the hardest thing because, okay, so yes, my name is Viv, but I had to create a character or a persona that embodied what I felt like was a version of me that wasn't flawed, right? And when I started this podcast, it was kind of like, yes, this is the version of me that would be accepted by people because she's less flawed. She's more perfect, like she's healed. So she's no longer talking about pain or whatever. But one thing I love about life is that you could have an idea in your head. But at the end of the day, like you being human still shows up. And I love that with the podcast. I realized that, oh my gosh, I love my flaws. And it's the main thing we're discussing, moving from shadow and how we transmuted that to light. So I always reference where I'm coming from and how that's helped me to be this person now. But in building myself up, I have to say that I started by changing the way I spoke to myself. And I started to keep promises to myself. I find that, if you're a recovering people pleaser, you're coming from a place where you put other people before you. And which is why I always talk about that isolation and removing other people's voices and thoughts. I also read tarot cards. So the card that came up to mind when you said, let go of everybody else's thoughts and what they feel, or, no longer carrying other people's burdens, was the 10 of Wands. And, it's about releasing the baggage that isn't yours in order to just hold on to yours alone. And you find that when you do release baggage that isn't yours, thought forms that aren't yours, your perception of self that aren't yours, but were projected onto you, and it's just you standing with your own baggage, you realize that, wow, your perspective of self changes, at least is less heavy. And you're able to approach yourself, or at least I did. I started to approach myself like a sister would a little sister. And I say sister would a little sister because I didn't have a strong mother figure or strong matriarchs to give me that framework of kind, gentle nurturing of a mother and a daughter. So I started with that sister relationship to myself. And Monday was a new moon in Cancer where I was like, you know what? I think we can upgrade to mother-daughter relationships. How can I mother my inner child? How can I bring in nurturing? And one thing has to do with food, because I have kind of like a weird relationship with food. I love it, but I don't make the effort to eat a lot. So it's about, for me, building myself up started up with filling in the voids or finding ways to fill in those voids that cause me to act a certain way. So that's my perspective. What's yours?
Yeah. Oh my God. Thank you for sharing that. I'm so delighted hearing you talk. You were just delightful to listen to.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I love what you're saying, and keeping promises to yourself. There's so much goodness in that practice. And I want to kind of point out something from what you're saying that you have grasped a hold of that took me a little while to get in my journey. I've been out of the toxic religious community that I was in for around 8 years now. But like when I first left, I didn't understand. I was so broken and so hurt and building myself from the ground up that I jumped to something else that I felt like was validated by other people. And instead of doing I actually have to change how I relate to things and myself in order for that to change. It actually, I had to build capacity in a little bit of a safer framework that wasn't mine yet in order for me to then be like, okay, but I actually need to be kind to me or approach this differently if change is actually going to occur. Like if we're going to actually heal this, then where it begins needs to shift. And for me, that's happened a lot through my experiences with my body and listening to what my body needs, keeping promises to myself and supporting myself to heal in a lot of different ways. It's been profound, and a lot of it has had to do with that dialogue, with that actually being with the awkward, uncomfortable day-to-day, keeping those promises to ourselves and being with unglamorous things. Like that, I know that self-help wants to hand us like this, and I would really fucking love it if you got like a silver bullet, you know. I was sold on those programs for the longest time because I really wanted something like that. But what I've come to realize over the past 3 and 4 years is that the most profound change happens in the day-to-day. It happens in the actual shifting of how you are doing something, not the quick doing something.
Yeah. I love that. I love that a lot. You know something? Speaking of the body, that was my next question, because obviously in building your relationship with yourself, you do have to think about your relationship with your body, right? And my question for you was, how can we learn to trust our intuition more?
There's so many aspects to this, and it depends on like where you feel like you have access to it. But our bodies feel safer with us when we pay attention. They get louder typically. Yeah. So I'm going to go back to keep saying what you said, which is like keeping a promise to yourself. Not necessarily just a promise that's like, I'm going to do this every day and do it no matter what, but rather like, I'm going to listen to my body and drink water when I need to, or I'm going to, when I notice I need to pee, I'm going to go do that. And like noticing with compassion when you don't, and just then letting it go. Like that practice creates and can create this inner safety that then allows us to have that inner dialogue that allows for a safer place to be with, and a place for those intuitive hits and the things that we desire to come forth, because there's a safe space for them to do so. So it's kind of like all encompassing. Like there's so many things to unpack. Like if you want to go the like intellectual route, there are things that we need to unlearn from that space, or understand where we're coming from, the layers of intersectional identity that are impacting our ability to feel safe in our bodies. Like understanding those things can really be validating for our experiences. So that's a level of it too. But mostly what I'm working with my clients is the practice of the really little basic things, the practices that we do, the way that we see ourselves, that inner dialogue, and even to the way that we touch ourselves regularly, and the way that we care for parts of ourselves that other people reject, or that we even tend to reject.
Yeah. I love that. I think my perspective is that, you know, the body really is that vessel that houses our spirit, and coming from a place where you're not that connected to self, it's not like you're even listening to yourself to even start listening to your body. You're not paying attention to your inner mind. You're not paying attention to the sensations in your body. But what I love is that, all right, everyone, we're back, and we're back talking about the body. I was just sharing my perspective on what I felt about our relationships with our bodies. Because I feel like that's a very key thing. I think I'm coming from a place in which I was heavily dissociated. So dissociation was my way to go through life in order to just, you know, live. So my relationship with my body was very difficult. I avoided anything that made me feel grounded in it, until I had to grow past that and realize that I have to be in my body to be more present, and I have to build a relationship with my body better. I think that's one of my key blocks that I'm working through, my relationship with my body. So it shows up in eating, it shows up in other things that I do to just be, you know, away. I can say that I've greatly improved with presence in my body in the past couple of months, especially with my relationship with food. But one thing I was saying was that in your self-development process, or in my self-development process, through healing blocks, through rewriting my programming and trying to calm my nervous system, I became aware of the fact that my body sends me sensations in different parts of my body when the certain messages it wants to send. I know what it feels like when, oh, this is danger, move. I know what it feels like when somebody is like sending a mixed signal. You know, I know what it feels like when somebody is portraying that they like you, but they really don't, you know? So I was saying that. So for me, I feel like I loved what you said about safety. I think first of all, it starts with safety. I feel like when you start to feel safe in your body, you start to hear it better. And I feel like when you make it, when you're more intentional to listen to your body, the same way you want somebody in a relationship to listen to you when you're talking, it's when you can really improve that relationship and start to improve your intuition. Because ironically, I'm highly intuitive. And one thing that I did avoid the most was trying to use my body as a tool. You know, it's easy to use cards. It's easy to read the stars for me, but literally the first tool I have is the body I was born into. Girl, listen. So I think that's what I'm trying to, and I like that I'm saying that. And I feel like my body even calming and as I'm saying that, because I feel like that's the part of me that I neglected the most after everything in this self-love journey. So I like that I'm coming back to base, and I like that I'm able to hear myself more and know that I'm giving myself what I need, which is being attentive to me. Yes. So that's me on the body. I find that, yeah, by doing that, by listening more, you can hear your intuition better and just, you know, have a better quality of life because you're listening to your inner direction and your inner compass. Yeah.
Yes, that's so critical. And I'll harp on the safety piece more too, because often we will like, and you know, I'm guilty of this myself. I'll be like, what can I do to fix whatever? Like, I need this to be better and I need to show up more fully here, not realizing that that is not a safe place for me to show up in. So my whole system is just like, we can't. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? And it's not me. It's that my body is protecting me. Yes. And so I think it's important to know, like, when we do feel that safety is when those things begin to step in. So like finding a safe place. And if that is just you for now, or if that's with a therapist, that's with a coach, that's with a best friend, a partner, whoever it is, or if it's just you, feeling that out and noticing what that feels like versus the place you're trying to fix can really help you know when it is actually safe versus when it's not, and grow in the space that does make you feel safe.
Yes. Thank you for that, because I'll tell you this, my entire childhood was built around unsafety. So I fashioned what was very unsafe and dangerous was safe to me, or was thought to be safe. And I feel like I now realize that I started to dissociate because my body was very much more, what's the right word? It gave me more messages as a child. When I was, obviously as a child, you're more sensitive and all of that. So because anytime my body said this is unsafe and I was forced to be in that situation, I had to shut down my body and my feelings in order to be in that situation, or else there'll be consequences of not showing up in that situation. So that is where that I'm not listening to my body thing came from. And the messiness in all of that, in untangling that, to be able to recognize what unsafety feels like, is such a shadow moment, because it's holding a mirror to the past where safety was fashioned, or safety was fashioned as safety. You know what I'm saying? Wow. And another thing that I realized was that I started to know that places were unsafe when it caused me to prove myself. I was doing too much to fit in. And now I realize that that's why fitting in doesn't seem natural or organic, because it seems to me that fitting in means going against your body that has already made it clear in a certain way and feeling that this isn't the right space for you. But sometimes we may misinterpret and feel like, no, this just means that we should try harder, you know? So I'll find myself pushing more, proving more to be somebody that could fit into a space. But that was a shadow, because when I realized that, no, this spaces that are safe don't make you feel like you have to prove that you're in this space or that you fit in. You just align. There's never any effort or force to be in a space. And trust me, when you're safe, your body feels so calm and relaxed. So it's about knowing that safety comes with relaxation and calmness. And that's where that calming your nervous system down comes in as well with the body. That's what came up for me. On top of that, it was also a shadow moment where I realized that, girl, like you're so used to proving that you can fit in, or you're so used to proving that you're lovable because of back in the day where that was the environment. You always had to prove that you could be loved. You always had to prove that you were the child that deserved that love. You never got it. So you spent your whole years trying, and that becomes that programming in your mind, because you go out into the world and you find other environments that replicate that environment that you started off in, and you do the same thing. So I'm very happy that when it came to my relationship with my body, I realized that, wow, I feel this way and it's not a normal way, even though you've been used to it for years. This is on safety. So we have to work on our nervous system. We have to calm it down. We have to isolate. We have to be with ourselves. We have to calm ourselves down and rewrite or reprogram what safety feels like. That's why I said I'm very much more aware of gentler and kinder speech, because that's not something I was used to. So it's like reprogramming. Safety means somebody is gentle, somebody is kind. You're not trying to be somebody you're not. Because growing up, I had to like cut out every single part of me that made me happy in order to be accepted back at home. And that's why one thing I'm very big on this space is being able to look at parts of you that you repress or cut away for people to accept you, and accepting those things back and realizing that, oh, wow, I don't have to modify myself for people to like me. Get the fuck out of my life. Like, I accept me for who I am. So if you're not accepting every part of me whole, why are you here? And I want people to realize that, like, you don't have to modify or minimize to have people in your life. If people need a minimized version of you for you to be in their life, they need to get the fuck out. That's what I always say. So yeah, that's why my next my next prompt is on. Oh, do you have something that you'd like to share on that before we move on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say it's really beautiful that you're able to recognize that. Like, you were able to see what was going on, like that. Oh, like I'm actually doing this again. Like, that moment,
yes,
it equates like years of growth work, and it's like, it feels like such a small thing. It's like, oh, I realize that this place isn't safe, but like, you've been building capacity, and then you're finally able to be like, oh wait, like, I don't want that anymore. That's not safe. Now I know what unsafe is. It's so beautiful to see.
Thank you. Yeah, and it was so difficult to get here, and I'm sure you understand as well, coming from where you're coming from, which is why I wanted us to speak on self-reclamation. What's your perspective and thoughts on self-reclamation? How would you talk about how would you start on that? Is this something that is also what leads to wholeness of self? Please, can you share your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I love the word reclamation. What a cool word. And concept. I feel like for me, self-reclamation has been the ability to bring back choice to myself. So it's been about that understanding of what's actually mine to control, what's mine to choose about, versus what I can't control, and letting that go, like other people. And it reclaiming means like actually understanding what I want, what I need, and being able to make choices for myself. It can be such a powerful thing. That process, like I was just saying, it was years and years of building capacity to make really small choices and be with the discomfort of like, I made a choice. Was it the right one? And all of the feelings that come along with that, to being with, oh, like, I can make a bigger choice now and deal with the consequences.
Yeah.
Good or whatever, or neutral even, because I've reclaimed my own capacity, my own sovereignty in that space.
Yeah. Wow. Pardon me for a bit, because it's like, I feel like some tears come into my eyes, because I love that word self-reclamation. And I love that you said that it's about bringing back choice. You get me? Because I feel like sometimes, or I feel like people don't feel like they have a choice when they start off in certain environments. So I just feel like
that's what trauma is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just feel like
it's okay.
I feel like the word triggered me because it's like sometimes people don't feel like they have autonomy over themselves, and they don't feel like there's something to reclaim. They feel like they're just there, like they're nothing, So
Yeah.
I love that you said that, I feel like everybody should feel like they have self-autonomy, that they can make the choices that they want to make, and that there are aspects of themselves that they may have rejected that they can call back, I feel like people lose themselves in so many situations, dynamics, interactions, and I love the fact that one can make that intention to call those fragments of themselves back into wholeness, and it does show up in the little things. I think people forget that, or people think that it's big things that lead you to this self-reclamation, but it's in the daily things, it's in the everyday things, So I really like that. Thank you. I didn't expect to cry. It's just that, wow. It's just that the whole...
Yeah, I mean, trauma is like having the choice taken away, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you're talking about like the experience of like you felt like you didn't have autonomy because it was taken away from you. That there is nothing more violent than taking away choice.
Yes, exactly.
And when that happens, we lose our access to ourselves. Yeah. And we see this over and over in colonization and the way that white supremacy controls things. It's this violence of taking away autonomy, human dignity, and doesn't realize what it's doing, or maybe it doesn't give a fuck. But that experience of not having a choice is the most traumatizing thing.
Yeah, for real.
And it takes a lot to recover from.
Yeah. So I'm really thankful that we're having this discussion, because clearly it's healing. And that word reclamation is so powerful. You, like listeners, if you've ever felt like you didn't have a choice, you didn't have control over yourself, you can always call yourself back. You can always call aspects of yourself back, and you can, what's the right word? Self-autonomy. I've always said this in different episodes. You do have self-autonomy. You do have a choice. People give you that illusion of not having a choice. And I've always said, it's about asserting yourself. It's about advocating for yourself. That's how you self-reclaim as well. Fighting for your self-respect, fighting for dignity, knowing that you are worth defending, knowing that your needs are worth voicing, knowing that you are worth fighting for, especially when you've been in places where people never fought for you. You can be the first person to be that for yourself. So don't forget that, okay? Thanks, Christina. So now...
Yeah, can I add something to that?
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, you mentioned earlier the feeling of like you're just like coming out of that. It's like you don't know who you were before, so it's hard to like come back to yourself. The beautiful thing about this is it has that perception, but you were born whole, not broken. You're not broken. You were born whole. So you always have the blueprint or the space within you. Your body actually knows those things. And your body knows a lot of things, but your body does know you and does know your value at a core level. So there is always something to come back to, even when it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's encouraging. So yeah, a key thing, we already have the blueprint in our bodies. So we just have to return. It's about returning back to who we were before we forgot who we actually were. Yeah. So the next question I have for you is about, moving from your religious background to having the identity that you had when you were in your religious group, I guess, to now. And I'll start by saying my perspective. It's similar to mine. I grew up in a Muslim household, very extreme actually. And when I say extreme, I just mean, we're forced to always do what we needed to do, to pray, to fast, everything. But it wasn't in a gentle manner. It was more of a forceful manner. And I was religious for sure. I used to do everything possible. But I think it came to a point where I was like, I don't know if this fits me anymore because of how harsh it's being fed to me. So I'm pulling away. And that's how I started my spiritual journey in 2017. I went from being someone that prayed all the time to, exploring spiritual texts, exploring other things, seeing life beyond that. And I found that my relationship to God determined how I felt about myself while I was in that religion. But when I saw God differently, like bigger, because I felt like it was bigger. I felt like there were less restrictions, less limitations. I felt like we could play. I felt like we could have fun. It felt like I could see myself differently as well. Like there were less chains around me. I could just be in a way where it wasn't like I was judging me harshly for everything. Because even though I was Muslim, when I was praying 5 times, I still drank. I still had sex. I still smoked. You know what I'm saying? But I knew my heart was good. But what I liked when I moved from Islam is that I just felt like I was more myself, honestly. I felt like I could be that person that could study different religious texts, spiritual texts, take God in from different avenues and just create my own blueprint, like you said before, create my own system, have my own relationship with God, and therefore have my own relationship with myself. And that is when I became a better person to myself and to other people, because I was heavily influenced by my relationship with God, because, you're Muslim first before everything. And when that changed, I tell you, it's like I became even kinder, because it's not like I was doing things based on being accepted by God and going to heaven. I was just doing things because my heart wanted me to do that. So I that's my question. It's like, what was that change in self? Because you did mention a few things beforehand, but what was that huge change in self? And what was that huge self-reclamation moment when you moved from that religious background to just being you and figuring life out on your own in a spiritual element, in a spiritual aspect? What was that like?
Oh, well, so many parts of what you said, I'm like, yes, that is exactly it. You were like, I was just, like, you sighed, and I was like, that's it. That's the feeling of like liberation. You're like, I can breathe out here.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. And you also mentioned that like how you saw God was really related to how you saw yourself. And that bit of insight and wisdom is huge. And across the board, how we see ourselves is how we see God, and how we see God is how we see ourselves. Throughout humanity, that has been true. And so like when you see God as being in this framework, honoring these specific things only in this particular way, you inevitably see yourself in a smaller way. And so that expansiveness of like, now I can like, it can be anything. Like that's so profound. I think for me, like I had, this will probably be the first line of my book or chapter or something, but I didn't take a full breath until I turned 26. And it was in that year that I let go of the concept of hell. And it had like, although within the space of the Christianity that I was in, we were supposed to love God for the sake of loving God, which I did. And there was always like basically hell on the other side of the canyon that I could easily just be tipped over into. So it's like, do you really have free choice when there's a gun to your head? Like, no, you don't. And so this thing had been, along with an entire lifetime built around, you're Christian first before anything else. Very similar. Like God is first. You could say to someone, shoot my parents, I believe in God. Like these things were overt. Like this is what was said to us. So like, it's very extreme. And this one piece, this component of like, if you don't believe this, you're going to hell. And that's a very real thing. That belief held the rest of it together for me. And I went through a really dramatic breakup, and it was an emotionally abusive relationship. I finally was like, I have to leave. And I moved to a new city. And in doing so, I began to just be more open to like understanding what I really was within the Christian religion, but I was like, I want to really know this time. Like, I want to know on a deeper level my intimate relationship with God. Like, I was very dedicated. And I went to El Salvador with my brother. And on this trip, I like, this is like the moment for me, the beginning of the moment, I guess. I was on a rooftop. We went and got a bottle of some El Salvadorian alcohol. I don't know what it was. Some kind of wine or something. And we were listening to music, my brother and I, and we were dancing on this rooftop. And like in this moment, I like prayed with my soul, and I was like, tear down the boundaries around who I think you are and show me who you really are. And from that moment, I started to see God in people. I started to see God in nature. I started to see God in myself and in everything living. And it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was like, oh,
I love that.
I see now. I feel like I could reclaim myself, not as just myself as autonomous, but also as a part of life, a part of existence, not alone, but connected to humanity, connected to this experience, and also able to choose. And it's just like this beautiful, like, oh, I'm no longer separate and special and like going to be a martyr for this religion. I am a part of all living things. And how beautiful is that?
Yeah. I love that completely. I think just from you speaking, I can just feel that liberation in that moment. And I think that's what we always wanted without possibly knowing. Just that, I guess the word that came up was autonomy. That ability to just be and see how big we could be without restrictions or, a book of rules telling us how to be. So I really connect with what you said. And I love what you said about that, removing the boundaries and show me who you really are. Because I feel like when you can really tap into the expansiveness of yourself and interchangeably with God by seeing God in everything, nature, people, it changes your outlook on life and it changes the way you see yourself and receive yourself and perceive yourself. Because more than anything now, because of how I've experienced God in life, I'm like, everything is love. Everything starts from love. And I'm grateful to still be here, to have not come from a place of love, but have used myself as kind of like a seed to like cultivate love inside of me regardless. And I think at the end of the day, like when you realize that, yes, God produces miracles, but we as people also can manifest miracles in our lives as well. I feel like that's why I'm thankful that I left that religious group or religion to just be spiritual, to just, experiment with life, to really, really tap into the expansiveness of self, because I've allowed myself to see how expansive life is and God is, and that life isn't just black or white, that hell can really be here already and heaven can be here already as well. And it's about tapping into heaven on earth as opposed to the hell that everyone is already residing in. And I like the idea of not thinking of when I die, I'm going here or there. No, how am I living here now for me? And when I die, do I really care? I've done what I need to do, because I know that when we die now, we're souls and we're like, do we want to go back to learn more lessons? I've said this on every episode. I think that I said, I hope this is my last lifetime here. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think it's mine, but
okay.
I'm good with it.
Yeah, I'm just tired. Like, I'm tired of everything. But I think I'm grateful for this life experience, and I'm grateful to have actually been able to even tap into more of how I see myself through conversing with you, because I really, 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 really appreciate this discussion. You tapped into aspects of me that I didn't know that I needed to actually voice out, especially on my platform. I didn't know that would happen. So yes.
So glad. Thanks for holding this space, for sharing this space with me. I like, I'm just delighted by you and hearing you speak, and obviously your listeners are delighted by you as well. But I didn't expect to be so, I want to say charmed. Like, I find you really interesting and insightful and like keenly intuitive. I love hearing what you have to say.
Thank you so much. Likewise, you really touched my heart, and thank you so much for being on this episode. Like, I'm trying not to even cry some more, but you really, 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 your words really moved me, and thank you. Do you have anything else you'd like to say to the listeners? Any extra message about the self or embracing our messiness?
Yeah, everybody's a mess, and that's okay. And if you want support in being messy with someone who's also messy, my favorite thing ever to do is one-on-one coaching, because I love giving you the attention that you deserve.
I love that. Thank you so much, Christina. So I hope to see you again on the podcast. This is definitely not the last time you'll be hearing from me. Thank you so much. Thank you, listeners, for listening. If you really like this message, check out Christina on her website. Give us a message or leave us a message on our Twitter and Instagram. And yes, we'll send everything that we need to send to you in regards to resources and, you know, how you can find out for one-on-one coaching. Don't be afraid. You can do this. Okay. So yes, thank you so much, Christina. We'll see you next time. Thanks, listeners. Love you so much. Bye.